GAD, ceremonies, Mosaic. The ceremonies of the Indians in their spiritual worship are more after the Mosaic institution than of pagan imitation, which could not be if the majority of the old natives were of heathenish descent. For all bigots and enthusiasts will fight to the death for the very shadow of their superstitions or worship, when they have even lost all the substance. Keep that in mind. There yet remain so many marks as to enable us to trace the Hebrew extraction and rights through all the various nations of Indians, and we may with a great deal of probability conclude that if any heathens accompanied them to the American world, or were settled in it before them, they became proselytes of justice, and their pagan rites and customs were swallowed up in the Jewish. GAD, compare Indian versus pagan. To illustrate the general subject, I shall give the Indian opinion of some of the heathen gods, contrasted with that of the pagan. Keep in mind, this is James Adair speaking on his version of the Indian, aka heathens. GAD, compare Indian versus pagan. The American Indians do not believe the sun to be any bigger than it appears to the naked eye. GAD, compare Indian versus pagan. The American Indians do not believe the sun to be any bigger than it appears to the naked eye. Conversing with the Chickasaw Archimagus, or high priest, about that luminary, he told me it might possibly be as broad and round as his winter house, but he thought it could not well exceed it. We cannot be surprised at the reply of the Americans in this respect, when we consider the gross ignorance which now prevails among the general part of the Jews, not only of the whole system of nature, but of the essential meaning of their own religious ceremonies received from the divine majesty. And also when we reflect that the very learned and most polite of the ancient Romans believed, not by any new invented mythology of their own, that the sun was drawn round the earth in a chariot. Their philosophic system was not very dissimilar to that of the wild Americans, for Cicero tells us, Epicurus thought the sun to be less than it appeared to the eye, and Lucretius says, Tantalus il sol, a diminutive thing, and if the Israelites had not at one time thought the sun a portable god, they would not have thought of a chariot for it. GAD, compare Indian versus pagan. This they derived from the neighboring heathen, for we are told that they had an house of the sun, where they danced in honor of him in circuits, and had consecrated spherical figures, and that they likewise built a temple to it. For they that sanctified themselves and purified themselves in the gardens behind one tree in the midst, eating swine's flesh, and the abomination, and the mouse, shall be consumed together, saith the Lord, in Isaiah chapter 66, verse 17. GAD, compare Indian versus pagan. This they derive from the neighboring heathen. I read that. We find they had sun images, which the Hebrews called chumanim, made to represent the sun, or for the honor and worship of it. And the Egyptians met yearly to worship in the temple of Beth Shemesh, a house dedicated to the sun. Most part of the old heathens adored all the celestial orbs, especially the sun. Probably they first imagined its everlasting rays immediately issued from the holy fire, light, and spirit, who either resided in or was the identical Son. This they derived from the neighboring heathen. The idolatrous ceremony of the Jews Josiah utterly abolished about 640 years before our Christian era. The sacred text says, "And he took away the horses that the kings of Judah had given to the sun at the entering in of the house of the Lord by the chamber of Nathan-melech the chamberlain, which was in the suburbs, and burned the chariots of the sun with fire." You'll find this in 2 Kings chapter 23, verse 11. Indian Americans pay only a civil regard to the sun. GAD. Compare Indian versus pagan. 2. At Rhodes, a neighboring island to Judea, they consecrated chariots to the sun, on account of his glorious splendor and benign qualities. Macrobius tells us that the Assyrians worshipped Adad or Akkad, an idol of the sun, and Strabo acquaints us the Arabians paid divine homage to the sun, and etc. But the Indian Americans pay only a civil regard to the sun, and the more intelligent sort of them believe that all the luminaries of the heavens are moved by the strong fixed laws of the great author of nature. GAD. Compare Indian versus pagan. 2. 2 Kings chapter 17 verse 30. We read that the men of Babylon built Succoth-Benoth, tents of daughters, supposed to be the name of a Babylonian deity, the goddess Zerebenet, the wife of Merodach, worshipped by the colonists in Samaria. Having consecrated a temple to Venus, they fixed tents round it, where young women prostituted themselves in honor of the goddess. Herodotus and other authors are also sufficient witnesses on this point. Now, were the Americans originally heathens or not of Israel when they wandered there from captivity in quest of liberty, or on any other accidental account that vicious precedent was so well calculated for America, where every place was a thick arbor, leafy shade, it is very improbable they should have discontinued it, but they are the very reverse. And here is why. GAD. Compare Indian versus pagan. 2. To commit such acts of pollution while they are performing any of their spiritual ceremonies is deemed so provoking in impiety as to occasion even the supposed sinner to be excluded from all spiritual communion with the rest of the people. Or even was a man known to have gone into his own wife during the time of their fastings, purifications, and etc., he would also be separated from them. There is this wide difference between the impure and obscene religious ceremonies of the ancient heathens and the yet penal and strict purity of the native of America. The natives of America. GAD. Mosaic law. Stay with me now. GAD. Mosaic law. The non-observance of this separation a breach of the marriage law, and murder they esteemed the most capital crimes. When the time of the woman's separation is ended, they always purify themselves in deep running water, return home, dress, and anoint themselves. They ascribe these monthly periods to the female structure. not to the anger of Ishtohulo Abba. Gad, Mosaic law, corresponded to the Mosaic law of woman's purification at the Chabal. The Indian women absent themselves from their husbands and all public company for a considerable time. The women are separate for 3 moons, exclusive of that moon in which they are delivered. By the Jewish law, women after a male birth were forbidden to enter the temple, and even the very touch of sacred things 40 days, and after a female the time of separation was doubled. Gad, Mosaic law. Should any of the Indian women violate this law of purity, they would be censored and suffer for any sudden sickness or death that might happen among the people, as the necessary effect of the divine anger for their polluting sin, contrary to their old traditional law of female purity. Like the greater part of the Israelites, it is the fear of temporal evils, or the Most High, and the prospect of spiritual good that makes them so tenacious and observant of their laws. At the stated period, the Indian woman's impurity is finished by ablution, a cleansing with water or other liquid, and they are again admitted to social and holy privileges. Gad, Leviticus. By the Levitical law, the people who had running issues or sores were deemed unclean and strictly ordered apart from the rest, for fear of polluting them, for everything they touched became unclean. The Indians in as strict a manner observed the very same law. They followed the ancient Israelitish copy so close as to build a small hut at a considerable distance from the houses of the village, for every one of their warriors wounded in war, and confined them there, as the Hebrew lepers formerly were, without the walls of the city, for the space of 4 moons, including that moon in which they were wounded, as in the case of their women at the Chabal, and they keep them strictly separate, lest the impurity of the one should prevent the cure of the other. The reputed prophet or divine physician daily pays them a due attendance, always invoking Yod-Heh-Wah to bless the means they apply on the sad occasion, which is chiefly mountain alum and medicinal herbs, always enjoying a very abstemious life, prohibiting them, women, and salt in particular, during the time of the cure or sanctifying the reputed sinners. Like the Israelites, they firmly believe that safety or wounds immediately proceed from the pleased or angry deity, for their virtuous or vicious conduct in observing or violating the divine law. Gad, unclean fowls, the dead, and white men? They reckon all birds of prey and birds of night to be unclean and unlawful to be eaten. Not long ago, when the Indians were making their winter's hunt, and the old women were without flesh meat at home, I shot a small fat hawk, and desired one of them to take and dress it. But though I strongly importuned her by way of trial, she as earnestly refused it for fear of contracting pollution, which she called the accursed sickness, supposing diseases would be the necessary effect of such an impurity, which would be right. Eagles of every kind they esteem unclean food, likewise raven, though the name of a tribe with them, crows, buzzards, swallows, bats, and every species of owls. And they believe that swallowing flies, mosquitoes, or gnats always breeds sickness or worms according to the quantity that goes into them, which, though it may not imply extraordinary skill in physic, shews their retention of the ancient law, which prohibited the swallowing of flies, for to this that divine sarcasm alludes. Swallowing a camel and straining at a gnat. Such insects were deemed unclean, as well as vexatious and hurtful. Gad, unclean fowls, the dead, and white men. None of them will eat of any animal whatsoever if they either know or suspect that it died of itself. I lately asked one of the women the reason of throwing a dunghill fowl out of doors on the corn house. She said that she was afraid. Ufi abika hakis ele. It died with the distemper of the mad dogs, and that if she had eaten it, it would have affected her in the very same manner. I said, if so, she did well to save herself from danger, but at the same time it seemed she had forgotten the cats. She replied that such impure animals would not contract the accursed sickness on account of any evil thing they eat, but that the people who ate of the flesh of the swine that fed on such polluting food would certainly become mad. Gad, unclean fowls, the dead, and white men? 2. The Indians, through a strong principle of religion or spirituality, stay with me, abstain in the strictest manner from eating the blood of any animal, as it contains the life and spirit of the beasts, and was the very essence of the sacrifices that were to be offered up for sinners. And this was the Jewish opinion and law of sacrifice. Not opinion, but the law ordained and consecrated by the Most High himself to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, not to eat the blood. We're going to read that in Leviticus chapter 17, verse 11. Leviticus chapter 17, verse 11. For the life of the flesh is in the blood, and I have given it to you upon the altar to make an atonement for your souls. For it is the blood that maketh an atonement for the soul. Gad, unclean fowls, the dead, and white men. 2. Antiochus IV ruled the Seleucid Empire from 175 BC until his death in 164 BC, 9 years. Not going to read that. We're going to go down. The first and second book of Maccabees, please read that book. It's in the Apocrypha. Painted the Maccabean Revolt. Please know what the Maccabean Revolt is. As a national resistance of a foreign political and cultural oppression. Modern scholars argue that the king was intervening in a civil war between the traditionalist Jews in the country and the Hellenized Jews in Jerusalem. What began in many respects as a civil war escalated when the Hellenistic kingdom of Syria, northern side of Israel, sided with the Hellenizing Jews in their conflict with the traditionalists, the normal Hebrews. As the conflict escalated, Antiochus took the side of the Hellenizers. Please know what Hellenized Jew is, by the way. By prohibiting or forbidding or not allowing the spiritual practices that the traditionalists had rallied around. Gad, unclean, fowls, the dead, and white men. 2. An instance lately happened which sufficiently shews their utter aversion to blood. A Chickasaw woman, a domestic of one of the traders, being very ill with a complication of disorders, shouldn't mess with them domesticated people, the Indian physician seemed to use his best endeavors to cure her, but without the least visible effect. To preserve his medical credit with the people, he at least ascribed her ailment to the eating of swine's flesh, blood, and other polluting food, and said that such an ugly or accursed sickness overcame the power of all his beloved songs and physic. In an anger, he left his supposed criminal patient to be punished by Lok Ishtohulo. I asked her some time afterwards what her ailments were, and what she imagined might have occasioned them. She said she was full of pain, that she had abika uk plu, the accursed sickness, because she had eaten a great many fowls after the manner of the white people, with the ishis uk plu, accursed blood, in them. Gad, unclean, eat not the end of the bone. Under this argument I must observe that el-ubid signifies the thigh of any animal, and petha tikal, the lower part of the thigh, or literally the hanging of the foot. And when in the woods the Indians cut a small piece out of the lower part of the thighs of the deer they kill, lengthways and pretty deep. Gad, unclean, eat not the end of the bone. Among the great number of venison hams they bring to our trading houses, I do not remember to have observed one without it, from which I conjecture that, as every ancient custom was designed to convey either a typical or literal instructive lesson of some useful thing, and as no usage of the old heathens' world resembled this custom, it seems strongly to point at Jacob's wrestling with an angel, and obtaining for himself and his posterity the name Yisrael, perhaps Yashar'el, divine guide, or one who prevails with the omnipotent. And to the children of Yisrael, not eating the sinew of the thigh of any animal, to perpetuate the memory of their ancestors' sinew being shrunk, which was to obtain the blessing. Gad, unclean, eat not the end of the bone. Genesis chapter 32, verse 32. Therefore the children of Yashar'el eat not of the sinew, which shrank, which is upon the hollow of the thigh, unto this day, because he touched the hollow of Jacob's thigh in the sinew that shrank. Gad, unclean, eat not the end of the bone. To eat such, they imagine, would breed worms and other ailments, in proportion to the number they eat. That's right. And I have been assured by a gentleman of character, who is now an inhabitant of s.Carolina, whoop, whoop, and well acquainted with the customs of the northern Indians, that they also cut a piece out of the thigh of every deer they kill and throw it away, and reckon it such a dangerous pollution to eat it, as to occasion sickness and other misfortunes of sundry kinds, especially by spoiling their guns from shooting with proper force and direction. Now, as none of the old heathens had such a custom, must it not be considered as of Israelitish extraction? Huh? Hmm? GAD, account of the Cherokee Nation. And we're going to wrap this up. We shall now treat the Cherokee Nation as the next neighbor to South Carolina. That will be my state. Their national name is derived from Chi-Ra, fire, which is their reputed lower heaven, and hence they call their magi or priests Chira-Tog, men possessed of the divine fire. The country lies in about 34 degrees north latitude, at the distance of 340 computer miles to the northwest of Charlestown. That's my city. 140 miles west-southwest from the Catawba Nation, and almost 200 miles to the north of the Muscogee or Creek country. Just a little fact. I hope you enjoyed my video lesson of Indians and their relation to the Hebrews. Thank you.